As he does from time to time, Drew Ryun with American Majority joining us via phone this morning. Good morning, Drew. How you doing, sir?
Good, Jeff. Always good to be with you.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. A lot of things happening in the political realm. Of course, you've been in politics, I guess, since you were born, basically. From what you're seeing right now, give me kind of your take on the political landscape in America and then more specifically in the state of Texas.
Well, I think we're looking at a shifting landscape right now. A couple of things that we're definitely engaged in with American Majority Action, our C4, that I know you are very well aware of, Jeff, is that tension between this organic grassroots movement known as the Tea Party and the ostensible party hierarchy of one party, and that's the Republican Party. And I think that the tension is who's leading and who's going to drive this bus going into 2012. And I think that's something that has yet to be resolved. But I will say this. My money is always on the grassroots when it comes to fights like that as to who will control party structure, who will control the direction. It's simply having the right kind of game plan and putting it in place. The other thing I was literally just blogging on when you called was the state of the Republican presidential primary. And I'll just share a quick story with you before we move on, but a friend who's a consultant called the other day and said, hey, with Mitch Daniels out, I'm going with this candidate. Yes, I know he's a second-tier candidate. And I interrupted him and said, aren't they all? and I really think that is what we're facing right now is a lot of conservatives are looking at the crop of candidates going, I just cannot see myself charging up the hill for them. And I tell you what, I think there's an opening for some folks to jump into the race at what would be considered the last minute and really catch fire and take off. And one of the guys that I'm actually blogging on right now, and I know he's not perfect, but when you're in politics, it's hard to find that perfect candidate. I think there is an opening for Rick Perry to jump into this presidential race, catch fire, and really do some damage deep into the primary season. Whether he wins or not, I don't know, but I think all of a sudden his stock just rose over the last week or so.
I have to agree with that, and he keeps, and we've talked about this for almost a year now. I was deeply involved with some of his folks during the campaign last year, and I kept asking them, all right, just tell me, do you think he's going to run for president? And they all said, he says he's not even thinking about it, but down deep inside and among the inner sanctum, if you will, of the Perry folks, they've always said that was always a reality or a possibility.
Right.
And you see his rhetoric over the last few days here, and he seems as if he's mounting a case against now the president as opposed to his rhetoric against the administration.
Well, and if you look, too, at his book, Fed Up, you look at kind of that niche of the market that he has carved out for himself. It is the states versus the federal government, but it's also the states versus the Obama administration. He has become, in a sense, that mouthpiece. And, the thing is, people are like, it's too early for another Texan. I beg to differ. I think what America is craving right now is a straight-shooting conservative who will look at Barack Obama and give straight answers and turn to the American people. And I love this story. I heard it on the stump a couple weeks ago from Rick Perry when California legislators came into Texas and said, what are you doing right? Rick Perry said, it's very simple. Don't spend all the money. I mean, it's that, and again, I sound like I'm making the case for Rick Perry. I myself have not made up my mind. I'm just saying objectively, all of a sudden there's an opening for Rick Perry that if he wants to jump in, I think he's got a really good chance of winning this thing, the primary.
Well, you and I both know sometimes in politics you have to hold your nose while you hold hands with somebody.
Right, and again, he's not perfect, but I guess that sweet spot, that nexus in politics is finding the candidate with the least amount of warts who is the most viable. And again, you can go through the current crop of, Mitt Romney, Romneycare, Pawlenty with his host of problems, Ron Paul. There are a lot of folks who are like, yeah, charge up the hill for Ron Paul. Problem is, most of those are not Republican Party primary voters. You look at Herman Cain, that everybody's like, we love his rhetoric. Herman Cain can't raise money. I mean, you can go through over and over again. And again, that leads me to Rick Perry. Not perfect, but generally conservative, has made some great stands on some good issues, and the man can raise money. So, I mean, you start doing the math like that, and all of a sudden it leads you to that. So, I don't know. I mean, I've gone on a little bit long on that one, but I think there are a lot of things, again, in this shifting political landscape where I think it's going to be exciting over these next 18 months to see where we are now as a conservative movement, the Tea Party, and to see who's going to jump into this presidential race and where that's going to lead us going into November of 2012.
Speaking of the conservative movement, where do we stand in the Lone Star State? I was talking to a mutual friend of ours yesterday who's a political consultant. We were talking about, in my opinion, we need to put the crosshairs, so to speak, figuratively speaking, on the Texas Senate. Your thoughts about that?
Well, if you look at the electoral realities, I think you've got to look at Wendy Davis over here in the DFW Metroplex as far as one of those Democrats that could be knocked off. As far as just Texas politics, the thing that's just coming up right now that I'm concerned with is our good buddy, Joe Strauss, is already running around getting pledges for pledge cards to support him for Speaker a year and a half from now. That to me is what we ran into in this last Speaker's race, is you had a lot of ostensible conservatives giving their pledges to Joe Strauss well over a year in advance of the actual leadership election. That to me is something that I think that folks need to be aware of and tell their conservative members, hold your fire. Let's see who's going to be in that race for Speaker of the House this next legislative cycle. Focusing on the Senate, yes. I think, but being very aware of these leadership elections, because one thing I think the conservative movement is not good at is this, and that's winning the backroom fights over who will actually direct the various party entities.
How do we get there?
Well, I tell you what, it's continuing to win elections, which the conservatives are very good at, but then when election day comes and goes, not going home, staying engaged in the process and saying, you know what, we're not done yet. That was the first stage. The second stage is getting the right kind of leadership, because if you don't have that right kind of leadership, Jeff, you know this, pieces of legislation die, pieces of legislation are watered down, but if you have good, strong conservative leadership that's setting the tone, the conservative movement wins, but it's staying engaged all the way through, not just winning elections, but also winning leadership elections.
Man, great words of advice. How can folks learn more about American Majority and the Leadership Project?
Well, AmericanMajority.org, and then we have the New Leaders Project, which has its own microsite. But if you go to AmericanMajority.org, you can find all kinds of resources. In fact, we point a lot of folks to, hey, whether you're running for office, you're thinking about running for office, you want to be engaged in grassroots activities, go to AmericanMajority.org and click the Resources tab, and you're going to find a whole bunch of information that's going to enhance what you're hoping to do.
A great friend, Drew Ryan. Thank you, sir, so much for doing this. I appreciate it, sir.
Anytime, Jeff.
See you, buddy. Thanks. It is 7:42, 18 minutes away from 8 o'clock. Up next, a Sean Hannity update, followed by a conversation with Michael Q. Sullivan of Empower Texans. That's all coming up on Freedom 107. This is the Voice of Freedom.